They call that like ego disillusion. Whatever false ideas of yourself have emerged, then are shed from you through this powerful experience, and then you emerge sometimes a changed human being.
Yep.
Right?
And sometimes you emerge a changed human being, and sometimes you don't ever emerge. You go down into the dark night of the soul, and you just sort of disintegrate and never reemerge.
Warning, this podcast is for entertainment only and not intended for medical purposes.
I think it's really weird, though, because there's another element to schizophrenia activating. It kind of has to happen during this critical period, right? There's a critical period. I think for guys it's like 18 to 22, right? Yeah. And I think once you make it through that period, the likelihood that your schizophrenia will activate is seriously diminished to almost zero, I think.
Yeah. Right? I think that's true, but I think that if you do a ton of psychedelics, it probably increases your chance.
Yeah.
I also have this theory that people who have a tendency towards psychosis, you and I are using the terms psychosis and schizophrenia somewhat synonymously. I won't get into that differentiation because it's kind of confusing, but we're just using psychosis and schizophrenia interchangeably for now. People who have a tendency towards psychosis oftentimes also have an affinity, an attraction to psychedelics.
Yeah.
For some reason, which I would be happy to speculate on that, but I won't get into that either. But it's kind of like those people, they sort of like the psychic space of coming unglued.
Yeah.
And so they're drawn to that both naturally and through the use of psychedelics. And it can just lead to a tipping point and sliding down the slippery slope.
I think we should talk about that weird drug-seeking phenomenon of someone who tilts that way. Because also, bipolar disorder, true bipolar, in its active manic stage, also has this drug-seeking behavior and then can produce long-lasting psychotic
state.
Psychotic state.
Yeah, it's very similar. It's more like the psychotic schizophrenic version is more like psychedelic and just like coming unglued every which way, up, down, left, right, into different dimensions, whereas the bipolar one is more like becoming unmoored and like drifting up into this like expansive state.
Yeah, like one person I know ended up in this state, and then within a few months had somewhat employed several strippers as his like entourage. He bought them all BMWs, and then like he's like,
yeah, someone you know did that, and every single famous rapper did that too.
Yeah, it's it's funny how sometimes that looks like it's socially somehow not that odd, but if you're kind of just like in the tech industry and you're just busy building out various algorithms for whatever it is, and then you become like a dude with long fingernails and an entourage of strippers, like, dude, that starts to look unusual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like I want to give this really brief summary. It's a simplification that I think is super helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine a continuum of really put together, structured, glued up nicely, and if you go too far, you get super uptight and super rigidly stuck in a prison of how you're thinking. And then over here is really loose and flexible and changeable. And then if you go too far, you come unglued. Okay, so that continuum, it sort of feels like everyone's psychology is somewhere on that continuum. Most of us probably are a little kind of more over here. But then if you get really uptight neurotic and anxious and driven, you go too far over here, and this becomes this like anxious, uptight thing, and then you can get disconnected from relationships because you're so stuck in your thing, and then that can make you depressed. And so those people sort of benefit from things that help them loosen up. And if they're caught in their, quote, default mode network of their consciousness being so rigidly, psychedelics can help them, like, whoa, get open to whole nother worlds.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but the people over here who are already open to other worlds and are really changeable in their thinking or their states of consciousness, they don't really need more loosening up. They almost can use maybe a little bit more solidifying. And so for them, drugs, psychedelics that help them come even more unglued, it's like, whoa, and then they just like fall off into the abyss.
Okay, that was it. That was an interesting continuum description of what would you call that? Just like the basic, like, field of embodied consciousness. But no, it's almost are those personality traits? Are they?
I think it sort of could be a continuum, kind of like thinking versus feeling, introvert versus extrovert. It's like how rigidified and solidified your consciousness is versus how loose and changeable it is. Fixed versus mutable. I've heard those terms.
Okay, well, fixed. So I think in the fixed state, or either one, it seems like a combination of your identity, which can then highly solidify as like, I am an engineer, right? That's my identity. Yep. And I pick an engineer because that's a typically kind of like straightforward, rigid, easily measurable kind of a thing, right? And then it's like, okay, then you look at their personality traits. They're not open to new experiences. They're kind of just like, in a way, happily creating a world that is as psychologically controllable as possible, or the illusion of control.
And then I bet there's an additional percentage on top of that, and a larger one, that they don't necessarily have a genetic predisposition or genetic history, and they're maybe not going to end up with full-blown true psychosis or full-blown true bipolar, but they are a little on the loosey-goosey side of the coin, and they need to more kind of like, they need to get more solidified. And I think, so I run this clinic that's getting pretty big and active, and so I deal with a lot of new clients. Every week I have tons of new clients looking for therapy. So I deal with a fair number of people who are wanting psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And on average, a huge, like, disproportionate percentage of those people, the ones who are interested in psychedelic-assisted therapy are the ones who are already on the open to new experience, loose, and probably need more solidification. So I sort of feel like the engineers that could benefit from psychedelics, they're not interested in psychedelics. They're interested in finding new strategies to help them, like, get their lives back on track. And then the ones who are interested in psychedelics are already the hippies who are like artists, and they need help, like, fucking getting a job and learning to be responsible.
Dude, that is super controversial what you're saying, and it is, by your observation, accurate, right?
Right.
But so, okay, back to the person who then potentially needs to kind of crack out of their highly falsely solidified identity and then be open to new experiences so that they can actually live a fulfilling life.